This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Mag Gupta.
Chapter 32. Seaward. The celebration at Seaward was surprising and full of merriment. Nothing like this had ever been accomplished in the history of the realm. Alistair had made the journey from the Marble City to celebrate his son's victory, and in the months that passed, peace had returned to the realm. Soon, the army of Ferris was ready, and Tathar had his sole command. The number of volunteers for the force had swelled in both the Roman and Greek provinces, and the army suddenly went from 2,000 to 7. With the pirate army destroyed, Sicilia was ripe for attack, and he claimed the first city within a week of the army arriving at Faris. The Fountain Legion had returned to the Marble City and disbanded back into their religious practices, something that Alistair was very vocal against. He wanted the Legion to come over to his side of the campaign, but they refused, leaving the defense of the coast to Tathar and Julius. The Fountain Legion was honor-bound to not interfere in the affairs of the realm unless mandated by the king. They had operated in small contingents alongside armies on their own mandate, but for the first time in centuries, they had marshaled full force. This had attracted many of the kingdom's citizens to take the Fountain Legion's oath and join for life. The victory of Sicilia was received with a fever similar to the defeat of the Golden King. For the first time in almost 2 centuries, the kingdom had control of the river, and trade was exploding across the water, so much so that Misnir had to be called in to regulate the traffic to stop the ships from either crashing or simply clogging up the waterways. Faris was commemorated as a place of heroes, and the citadel was eager to bestow it with the highest honors of the citadel banner of the city. Half-Head had been promoted by Tathar to be his first legionary captain and was now the garrison commander of Sicilia, leading the first 5,000 men under Tathar's command. It meant he now shared a common rank with Turgon. The shipyards of Seaward could now work unmolested, and suddenly every noble with the money to contribute was funding the Greek navy. Misnir finally had a fleet worthy of Athena. The summer and autumn passed with a feeling of greatness and prosperity, but the next year came with sorrow and a great loss. The winter had been long and hard, the hardest in a long time, and Alexis had taken ill, very ill. He could barely open his blind eyes or breathe enough to talk. The entirety of the Seaward nobility had come to the city to bid their best wishes to their dying prince. Alistair wasn't taking it well. He wasn't talking to anyone, even Felthor. Callisto hadn't left her grandfather's bedside. Her pregnancy was in the late stages, so she was barely able to move without wanting to be sick. It was late in the day when Felthor came to visit them. Callisto looked up at him and gestured to him to be quiet. He came over to her and planted a kiss on her forehead. He looked down at Alexis, his frail body lit by the last remnants of the sun and a small candle. "How is he?" he whispered into Callisto's hair. "He talked today," she said, "but it was hardly good news. Talking about his uncle Rufus and how sorry he was about something." "Did he say what?" Felthor whispered, sitting down on the available chair. "No, he seemed to think his uncle would know about it," she sighed. "I wish I could help him." "The best thing you can do for him is to keep growing his great-grandchild," Felthor said, putting a hand on her bump. She gasped slightly and made a face like she was going to be sick again. Felthor hastily removed his hand. "Rufus," Alexis wheezed. "Uncle." Felthor raised an eyebrow at Callisto, who gestured at him helplessly. Felthor leaned over and took Alexis's hand. "I'm here, nephew," he said. He wasn't sure if he was playing along with this for his own curiosity or to give Alexis peace. "Uncle," Alexis blinked. "I did this to you. I'm sorry." "You didn't do anything," Felthor murmured softly, "and whatever has been is over now. You were the rightful prince. Your son was my brother. I took it from you. I'm sorry." His eyes rolled in his head and flopped back onto his pillow. He began convulsing for a moment, and then went limp. "I'll get the healers." Felthor hurried to the door. Callisto nodded and reached for a jug of water to fill a cup. The healers studied Alexis for a moment, and then gave their frustrating answer of, "He'll live, but only time will tell." Callisto had fallen asleep in her chair by the time they were over. The healer promised Felthor that he would watch over them both, and Felthor left. He was curious about what Alexis had said, but he wasn't sure that Alistair would be in much of a mood to talk. He found the uncrowned prince in his bedchamber. He was sitting at his desk with his chief aide. Alistair looked exhausted, all of his swagger and youthful energy gone. His perfectly formed face besmirched with stubble and food stains. He leaned back in his chair so that he could see Felthor enter the room, his head inclined down to fix the ache in his head. "You look like shit," Felthor greeted. The aide bowed and left. "You look like you haven't had sex in years and are growing old," Alistair grunted. He reached across the desk to reach his goblet, but his fingers closed over empty air, and he knocked the cup over the edge. "Fuck," he whispered, forming a fist and restraining himself from hitting something. He collapsed back into his seat. "Apologies." "Think nothing of it," Felthor smiled. He picked up the cup and placed it back on the desk. "When was the last time you slept?" Alistair simply stared at him, giving no indication that he would answer. "I've been speaking to your father." "You what?" Alistair started, waking up from his exhaustion. "Why?" "It was Callisto I wanted to see. Your father sort of simply talked at us." "What about?" "His uncle Rufus." Alistair was silent for a moment. It appeared he was having difficulty recalling the name. "Great Uncle Rufus?" Felthor worked the time estimates in his head and then nodded. "He died long before I was born. My father idolized him. He would tell me stories about his victories against the Southerners and the Kenshi to put me to sleep. When I was old enough, I looked him up. It turns out that when his father, the prince, was on his deathbed, he declined the throne and cut out his son from the inheritance. So why was your father apologizing to him in his stupor?" Alistair made a rude blowing noise. "Fuck knows. He never really talked about it. But when he refused the principality, law decreed it would pass to his younger brother. But my grandfather was little interested in ruling. He'd spent huge fortunes on stupid projects. He built bridges so he could race his knights across. He built fleets so he could watch them ram each other in contest, so he showed little promise. He needed to go on a military campaign to prove himself. He went against the Numids, and they poured molten gold down his throat, so the crown passed to my father. And he then ruled to be the longest prince in history." Felthor smiled. "Yes," Alistair grimaced. "I just hope he's proud of what I'm doing here." "There is little doubt," Felthor reassured. "You'll be the greatest prince in history and one great king." Alistair laughed, but then he threw down his fist down on the table in frustration. "I really need to fuck something." "You've been spending too much time with Turgon," Felthor smiled. "It's a shame that you have a wife, isn't it?" Alistair smiled. "If you'll excuse me, I'll visit her." And he got up and left. "Of course, my prince." Though the princess's screams of pleasure could be heard all over the palace, the mood of the city was not increased. Alexis's condition was worsening. The healers had taken to staying in his room at all times. Any attack on him was devastating, and the time it took for him to slip back into consciousness was lengthening every day. Falthor and Alistair were with him in his final moments. Again, Alexis was talking to his uncle Rufus, apologizing for what he'd taken from him. Alistair was sitting by his bed, trying to give him comfort, but Alexis didn't even acknowledge his presence. Callisto was crying to herself. She loved Alexis more than any of her family. Finally, Alexis stopped asking for forgiveness from his uncle and lay limp in his bed. "Did I do right with my children, uncle?" he asked. "Can I go to my death with pride in what I have done?" "I like to think I came out all right," Alistair smiled. "And what of my grandchildren? Is my legacy secure? Will Callisto be safe with her husband? Will I be able to protect her from the afterlife? What of my great-grandson?" Though none of them spoke, he seemed to hear an answer, and whatever that answer was, it gave him comfort. "Then I go to my death without regret." He seemed to wake up to their presence. "Alistair, my son, come." Alistair leant in. "My son, you are twice the man I have been in life. No father could have asked for a better son. Are you ready?" "Yes, father." Alexis struck him across his face. It cost him everything he had. His hand barely brushed Alistair's face. "That is how you remember your oath. Rise, Prince of Seaward." Alistair was stunned, but Alexis was starting to wheeze instead of breathe. The healers and the high priest shoved Alistair aside. "My prince," the high priest took his hand, "prepare to meet your fathers in eternity. Are there any truths you would lay before them while you are in the world of the living?" But Alexis did not answer. He was gone. His hands fell limply to the edge of the bed. Callisto broke down completely, her tears falling freely and staining her dress. The whole room seemed to exhale, and the high priest began saying his prayers quietly. The captain of the Seaward Guard turned to Alistair. "The prince is dead," he declared, unnecessarily loudly. "Long live Seaward. If you are the Prince of Seaward, then my men are yours." He fell to one knee, his arm across his chest, palm out. "What are your orders, my prince?" Alistair seemed to simply absorb what he was saying, without acknowledging what was being said. "My prince." "Alistair," Falthor said, touching the prince's arm. "Sound the bells," Alistair said, in a voice that had no tone. "The prince is dead. My father is dead. It is time for his city to mourn." Falthor looked at the guard captain, who nodded and left the room. The city did mourn, as did all of the kingdom. The days that followed during the week of mourning were dark and cold, to the point that torches had to be lit to illuminate the roads, even during the day. The city didn't need too much, as the people milling around the high temple for days at a time were all holding torches, even after his funeral. Callisto had taken his death particularly hard, and hadn't even thought about removing her mourning robes. She hadn't left the high temple where Alexis was buried. Even the discomfort of her pregnancy did not move her. She would simply stay, looking down at his tomb marker. Alistair was little better, and all he could think about was how to honor his father and etch his name into history. Lords from every corner of the kingdom came to Seaward. Even Richard and Tiberius braved the narrows of the mountains to visit them. Falthor met with them in Alistair's office. He was the Prince of Seaward now, in every aspect that the title implied, and he was burying himself in the work of office. In many respects, nothing had changed, as he had run his father's kingdom for nearly a decade now. but the burden of the title seemed to intensify his work. He'd finally decided on how to honor his father. All throughout history, major conquests and deeds of heroes were commemorated with marble archways in the city, each of them vividly describing what it was they were being celebrated for. Alexis didn't have much in terms of heroic deeds, and economic prosperity was something that was hard to describe in terms of excitement. So he decided on art, carving sculptures of farmers and builders. He was already gaining a reputation as a purveyor of art and poetry. Felthor, Richard, Tiberius, and Turgon found themselves having to wait for admittance. Finally, they were allowed in. "So now I need to wait to see the Prince of Seaward," Richard barked, disgruntled. His beard had grown back, and he seemed to have grown much bigger in terms of muscle mass. "I'm sorry," Alistair laughed. "My father was a great man. I want to do this arch justice." "So where do we stand?" Felthor demanded. "Are we still on our campaign to save the kingdom?" "Why do you think we're here?" Tiberius chuckled, who was also bearded. "We're ready." "You have an army?" Felthor asked. "We of Horseland have no armies," Tiberius said, in that tone that suggested he was saying something else. "What we do have is nearly 40,000 armed men who are tired of being raided by the kingdom's northern enemies." "So you're ready to defend our northern border when our war begins?" Alistair asked. "Yes," Tiberius nodded. "I'll be commanding our forces along the border. If the civil war makes us an easy target, we'll be ready." "Why are we worrying about the barbarians?" Turgon handed Richard a tankard. "They raid us and nothing else. They would sooner kill each other than fight us. When was the last time they went against us in full force?" 500 years ago, Richard answered coolly. "My ancestor destroyed their army of over 500,000 with only 50,000 men. That would have been a good fight. But the only thing that can unify those sons of whores is their hatred of us. If we're busy fighting each other, they will stop raping themselves and come down on us faster than a monster shit falls into a latrine. We need to be ready." "At any one time they can bring over 20 legions into the field," Tiberius agreed. 100,000 men raiding the countryside will certainly put a dampener in our plans." "Your plans," Richard corrected. "I'm no traitor. I'm just up for killing barbarians and drinking wine off of their women's tits." Turgon nodded in approval. "I'd like to change my allegiance to Horseland at this point." Felthor laughed. "Not a chance. Are we set for our side of the campaign?" "Not quite." Alistair made an awkward motion with his mouth. "My son's success has put something in the works. Any volunteers for an army want to unite behind him, not us." He took a deep breath. "He hasn't been involved in our plans yet." "Then we need to get him on our side," Felthor grimaced. "Where is the cock?" Turgon said, looking around to see if he'd magically appear from behind a plant pot. "Trying to talk to my daughter," Alistair groaned slightly. "She hasn't showed her face since father fell ill." "Callisto." "Galeen." Alistair rolled his eyes. "She didn't even attend the funeral." "What is the bad blood between them?" Turgon asked. "Everyone loved your father." "Not her," Felthor said. "Do you want me to talk to her?" "You can try," Alistair said. "But I would rather you get back to Islesfield and start raising me my army." "Right under Ignatius's nose?" Turgon smiled. "I would pay to see that." "Well, given that you will, you can pay now," Felthor said, with his arm outstretched. "Me and my mouth," Turgon cursed, as he pulled out his money bag and started placing coins into Felthor's hand. Julius was in a tower house on the outskirts of Seaward with his older sister Galeen. She was the complete opposite of Callisto. though they shared a similar appearance. She was the eldest child of Alistair, and she was, in the most extreme terms, unmarried. The whole realm knew her as the tainted princess of Seaward. When Alistair and his wife had had a daughter and then another, Alexis had told him not to marry them off until he had a son. Julius came into the world shortly after, but Alexis had sat Alistair down and told him the dangers of having a rival for the principality throne. If the husband to either of his daughters decided they wanted the throne, Julius would be the easiest choice to kill. Without an heir, Alistair would be forced to name one of the husbands the next prince. So it was decreed that neither Callisto nor Galeen would marry until Julius came of age. But 16 years had been a long time. Galeen had given up her maidenhood within a month of receiving the news, and had bedded anyone willing to be with her in the years in between. With each new lover, she had become more and more undesirable in terms of marriage, and when Callisto came to blossom, her envy began to take over, and she succumbed to opium and drink. In the end, everyone knew that she would never find a match. After that, she simply became the daughter of Seaward, living in as a private citizen in a villa in the Greek grasslands. After she had conspired to tarnish her sister's beauty with a burning powder, she was exiled from the city and confined to a tower near the mountains. Just once, Julius pleaded. Once, just because he's family. Family, Galeen spat. Her voice was deep and grunt-like. It detracted from her natural body shape, which would have been stunningly beautiful if not for her attitude. Don't make me laugh. He made me into this, while he praised you and that whore of a sister we have. She turned away from the window and half staggered, half limped over to the bed, her see-through gown hanging unkempt from her shoulder. She never spread her legs until it was her time. Julius scowled, averting his eyes from the accidental lewdness. And how long was I supposed to wait? Nearly half of my life is gone waiting for you to grow up. I see how everyone looks at me, and I don't care about my duty. She drank from a foul-smelling bottle. What has this family ever done for me except ask me to sacrifice all I am for them? Be your family for a start. I feel so honored, Galeen spat again. Some of the drink dripped down her chin. Get out, she shouted to Julius. I've got things to do. So I see, Julius said, looking disapprovingly at the half-naked slave who was standing nervously in the corner, holding a golden tray. You know where to find me if you change your mind. I won't. Galeen simply watched him until he left. Ingrate fuck, she grunted. For a moment she didn't move, and then she threw a vase at the wall, narrowly missing the slave.